Welcome to another journey through the forgotten tales of Middle-earth. If you enjoy these sleep stories, please remember to like and subscribe for more adventures in the realm of dreams. The ancient library of Rivendell lay silent save for the soft rustle of parchment. Lord Elon stood motionless, his ageless eyes fixed upon a weathered document. Illuminated by a single candle, his hand trembled slightly as his fingers traced the faded script. An occurrence so rare that the attending scholar glanced up. In alarm, what Elon held was impossible, a fragment of history deliberately concealed, discovered purely by chance within the binding of an ancient tome of elvish law. The document spoke of an encounter that had never been recorded in any official history of Middle-earth, a meeting so dangerous its very existence had been struck from record, a secret confrontation between Gandalf the Grey and the Dark Lord Sauron himself. Centuries before the War of the Ring, wind rushed suddenly through the open windows, extinguishing half the candles in the chamber. Elon looked up, his expression grave as shadows danced across the walls. Tell no one of this discovery, he commanded the scholar. Some secrets were buried for good reason, but what reason could be great enough to conceal such a meeting? What truly transpired when the gray pilgrim faced the Lord of Darkness? And most troubling of all, what agreement might have been struck between light and shadow? The document revealed only fragments of fortress in the gray mountains, a conversation beneath stone carved with forgotten runes, and most disturbing of all, the words reportedly spoken by Gandalf himself. Then we are agreed, none shall know of this meeting, nor of what passes between us this night. Elon carefully refolded the parchment, his mind racing through the implications. If this account were true, everything they believed about the conflict with Sauron might be built upon half-truths. The fate of Middle-earth had perhaps turned on this single secret. Meeting, what power could have compelled Gandalf to meet with the greatest evil of the age? What knowledge was exchanged in that hidden hour? And why had two immortal beings bound in eternal opposition chosen to keep their confrontation buried from the knowledge of all free peoples? The answer lay within the faded ink of a hidden history, waiting to be revealed. The gray mountains stood as ancient sentinels along the northern reaches of Middle-earth, their jagged peaks piercing the low-hanging clouds. Like the teeth of slumbering dragons, far older than the kingdoms of men, or even the realms of the elves, these mountains had witnessed the shaping of the world, and kept their secrets locked within stone depths, untouched by mortal hands. Upon the eastern spur of these mountains, nearly forgotten by all save the most ancient of dwarven records, there stood a fortress unlike those built by the younger races. Its foundations had been laid in the first age by hands that understood the deep magics that bound stone to will. Originally a watchtower during the wars of Beleriand, it had passed through many hands over the long ages, each occupant leaving their mark upon its weathered walls. The fortress bore no name in common tongue for names of power, and this place had been deliberately obscured from memory in the oldest dwarven records. It was called Barzanbar Dubon, the Fortress of Dark Vigilance. Though few now living would recognize such a title, its halls were constructed of a strange dark stone that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. The corridors wound and warred like the twisted passages of a fell dream, leading always downward toward chambers carved deep within the living rock of the mountain. The craftsmanship was neither dwarven nor elven, but something more primal, that spoke of hands that had learned their craft when the world was young. The council chamber, where Elon now stood, was bathed in the golden light of Rivendell a stark contrast to the fortress described in the mysterious document. Around him gathered the few he had summoned to bear witness to this troubling discovery. Gadriel stood near the window, her ancient eyes reflecting the light of stars long extinguished. Of all those present, she alone might remember the construction of the fortress described for her memory, stretched back to the shores of Valinor. Before the rising of the sun, Arwen sat quietly beside her father, her gentle face troubled as she studied the fragments of parchment laid carefully upon the table. Though young by the reckoning of her people, her wisdom ran deep as mountain roots. The elven chronicler who had discovered the hidden document stood nervously at the edge of the chamber. Lindia was his name, a scholar devoted to preserving the histories of Middle-earth. His slender fingers still bore the dust of ancient bindings, and his eyes were wide with the enormity of his discovery. There's a presence there, a will that bends the very life of the forest to its purpose, but more than this I cannot say, for when I drew too near my thoughts became confused, and my purpose forgotten. Gandalf had pondered these words as he smoked his pipe beneath the stars, sending rings of smoke floating upward to mingle with the night. Erictowil, powerful enough to confound one of the Ari, was cause for grave concern. It was on the 7th night after this meeting that the message came. A raven with unusually bright eyes had landed beside his campfire, a small scroll bound to its leg with thread of silver. The bird had fixed Gandalf with an intelligent gaze before departing swiftly, refusing the offered bit of bread. The message was written in an elegant hand using the High Elven tongue, but something in the formation of the letters troubled Gandalf, as if the writer had learned the script rather than been born to it. Knowledge of what troubles the greenwood awaits one who seeks wisdom. The fortress of the Ancient Watch in the Eastern Gay Mountains stands open to the gray pilgrim. No signature marked the parchment, and no seal had closed it, yet the knowledge that someone recognized him not merely as a wandering wizard, but specifically as the gray pilgrim, was disquieting. That same night Gondal had dreamed of a tower of black stone and of words spoken in a tongue that had not been uttered in Middle-earth since the defeat of Morgoth in the First Age. He had awakened with a sense of dread, yet also with certainty that he must answer this summons, though it read of trap and treachery before. Departing, he had journeyed to the Grey Havens to consult with Tion, the ship right eldest of the elves remaining in Middle-earth, and one of the few who knew Gandalf's true nature and purpose. This meeting bears all the hallmarks of deception. San had warned, his ancient eyes grave beneath brows white as sea foam. Yet I perceive you have already decided to accept this invitation. Knowledge is a weapon sharper than any blade. Gandalf had replied, if there is truth to be learned about the shadow growing in Greenwood, I must seize this opportunity, whatever risks it may entail. Then take this with you, Coden had said, pressing into Gandalf's hand a small phial of crystal within which gleamed the light of the star. It contains light from the 2 trees that once illuminated Valinor in the deepest darkness. It will remind you of who you are and why you were sent to these shores. Now, weeks after receiving the mysterious message, Gandalf approached the foothills of the Grey Mountains. The paths grew steep and treacherous, winding through narrow passes where the wind howled like the spirits of those who had perished among these unforgiving peaks. On the 3rd day of his ascent, he came upon a dwarf huddled in the shelter of an overhanging rock, his beard matted with blood from a wound upon his brow. What brings a son of Durin so far from the halls of his people? Gandalf asked, kneeling to offer water to the injured dwarf greed. The dwarf replied, bitterly we heard tales of Mithil in these peaks and journeyed. From the iron hills seek our fortune, but the mountain did not welcome us, your companion dead. Or scattered the dwarf, said his voice hollow with grief. Something dwells in the high fortress, something that spoke to us with fair words of treasure, calling itself the Lord, Lord of gifts, but its gifts were false, and its promises poisoned. Gondal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. This fortress where might I find it, the dwarf's eyes widened with fear. You seek it, then you seek your doom, wizard. But if you must know, follow the path that winds eastward around the great spur of rock shaped like a crown. There you will find what remains of the ancient watchtower of Barimar. But do not say I did not warn you of what awaits within its shadows. The fortress of Barimar rose before Gondal like a dark memory, given form in stone, unlike the graceful towers of elves or the sturdy halls of dwarves. This structure seemed to defy the very mountain upon which it was built. Its walls were fashioned of black stone, veined with some mineral that caught what little sunlight penetrated. The perpetual mists gleaming with a sickly iridescence. Gandalf paused at the foot of the worn steps leading to the main gate, his senses alert to dangers both seen and unseen. No guard stood watch upon the battlements, and no banner flew from the highest tower. Yet the fortress did not feel abandoned. Rather, it seemed to wait with the patience of stone, as if time itself held little meaning to whatever presence dwell within. I come at the invitation of the one who names himself Lord of Gifts. Gandalf called out, his voice carrying clearly through the mountain air. For a long moment only silence answered him. Then, with a grating sound that echoed among the peaks, the great gates swung slowly inward, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. Beyond, Gandalf tightened his grip upon his staff and stepped forward, crossing the threshold into a space that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Torches burned in wall sconces, their flames steadier than natural fire should be, casting pools of amberite that barely held back the oppressive darkness. The entrance hall stretched before him, larger than it had appeared from outside, its dimensions somehow wrong in a way that disoriented the senses. The ceiling soared upward in a shadow, supported by columns carved in the likeness of ancient trees, their stone branches intertwining to form arches of surprising delicacy. At the far end of the hall stood a figure clad in robes of deep crimson, face obscured by the hood drawn low over its features. The gray pilgrim honors my humble abode, the figure said, its voice melodious and pleasing to the ear. You have journeyed far in answer to my invitation. I seek knowledge of the shadow that grows in greenwood. Gandalf replied, advancing slowly across the vast hall, every sense alert for deception. If you possess such wisdom, I would hear it. The figure drew back, its hood revealing a face of such striking beauty that Gandalf nearly faltered in his step. Neither male nor female in appearance, but rather a perfect blending of both. The being before him had skin like polished ivory and eyes of such penetrating intelligence that they seemed to pierce through flesh to the very soul beneath. I am called Anatar, the figure said with a slight bow, though I've been known by many names throughout the long ages of this world. Please be welcome within these walls. Refreshment awaits in the chamber beyond, and then we may speak of matters that concern us. Both. Gondal followed his host through a series of corridors that seemed to bend and twist in ways that defied natural geometry. The deeper they ventured into the fortress, the more Gandalf became aware of subtle signs that this place had been recently occupied. After long abandonment, dust lay thick in corners, but was disturbed by the passage of many feet old tapestries had been rehung on walls there. Ancient weave depicting scenes from the earliest days of Middle-earth, including images that troubled Gandalf deeply, for they showed the forging of great rings of power. They came at last to a chamber less imposing than the entrance hall, but more richly appointed. A table of dark wood stood at its center, laid with platters of food and decanters of wine. The walls were lined with shelves bearing scrolls and books, many so ancient their bindings crumbled at the edges, but it was what hung upon the wall behind the table that drew Gandalf's immediate attention. A map of Middle-earth rendered with exquisite detail, showing not only the current kingdoms of men and elves and dwarves, but marked with symbols and annotations in a script so ancient that even Gandalf, with his vast knowledge, could decipher only portions. You have an interest in cartography, Gandalf observed, taking the seat offered to him, but leaving the food and drink untouched. I have an interest in all things, Anatar replied with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes, but particularly in the changing faces of kingdoms and the rise and fall of powers in this middle realm. As they spoke of seemingly harmless matters, Gandalf studied his host with growing unease. There was something familiar in the cadence of Anatar's speech, in the graceful movements of his hands, as he gestured to emphasize a point. Of memory stirred at the edges of Gandalf's consciousness, a recollection from another age entirely, but it remained frustratingly elusive. His gaze was drawn repeatedly to a pedestal in the corner of the chamber, upon which rested a small object covered by a cloth of black velvet. Something about it called to him a resonance that vibrated along paths of power that few in Middle-earth could perceive. Anatar followed his gaze and smiled. Once more, you have keen senses, Gray One. Few would notice what lies beneath that covering, for I have taken pains to mask its presence. With a graceful movement, he rose and crossed to the pedestal, drawing away the cloth to reveal a stone no larger than a man's fist, perfectly round and of a deep blue hue that seemed to shimmer with internal light. Around its circumference ran lines of strange runes that pulsed with a gentle rhythm like the beating of a distant heart. Do you recognize it? Anatar asked, watching Gandalf's face closely. Gandalf felt a chill run through him, for indeed he did recognize the artifact, though he had never before laid eyes upon it. A Palantir here, one of the 7 seeing stones, crafted in Valinor by the Nor elves and brought to Middle-earth by Elendil. Most were thought lost or captured, their locations unknown, save to a very few. A dangerous tool to possess, Gandalf said carefully, and one that raises many questions about your identity. Lord of Gifts, all tools are dangerous in the wrong hands, Anatar replied smoothly. In the right ones, they are merely useful. This one has shown me much of what transpires in the dark places of Middle-earth, including the spreading shadow that concerns you so great. Ly, he gestured toward the stone. Would you care to look? Perhaps it will show you what you seek to know about the darkness growing within Greenwood. Gandalf regarded the Palantir with caution born of ancient wisdom. Such artifacts were not to be used lightly, for they connected to others of their kind, and one never knew who might be watching from the other side of such a connection. I think not, Gandalf replied. There are other ways to share knowledge that do not carry such risks. Anatar expression did not change, but something flickered in the depths of his eyes, a momentary gleam like distant lightning. As you wish, though, I wonder what the gray pilgrim fears to see within a simple stone as the hours passed within the dark fortress Gandalf, and his mysterious host spoke of many things Anatar proved to be a being of vast knowledge, discussing the histories of Middle-earth with the familiarity of one who had witnessed them firsthand rather than merely studied ancient. Text The Shadow in Greenwood comes from the fortress of Thranduil in the southern reaches of the forest. Anatar explained, tracing a slender finger across the map that hung upon the wall. An ancient power has taken residence there, drawing to it creatures of darkness, and bending the very essence of the forest to its will. What manner of power? Gandalf asked, his eyes never leaving the face of his host, searching for any sign of deception. One of the nameless Anatar replied, a spirit of malice from the elder days, who has found a way to manifest once more in physical form. It gathers strength, slowly but surely building towards some purpose not yet revealed. The explanation aligned with what Gandalf had already suspected and with what Radagast had reported. It seemed a reasonable conclusion, for many evil things had escaped the breaking of the Aradm at the end of the First Age, fleeing into the dark places of the world to nurse their hatred through long centuries. And how came you by this knowledge? Gandalf inquired, sipping from a cup of water he had drawn himself rather than accepting the wine offered by his host. I have sources among the Easterling tribes who dwell near the forest borders. Anatar said smoothly. They speak of strange occurrences of beasts acting against their nature, of travelers who enter the forest never to return. But more than I have used the Panty to observe the movements of this power. Gandalf considered the information carefully. It was plausible that an Easterling lord of considerable learning might have come into possession of a seeing stone during the tumultuous years following the fall of Númenor. Such a being, viewing the growing darkness through the Pelennor, might indeed draw conclusions similar to those Gandalf himself had reached. If what you say is true, Gandalf said slowly, then this matter concerns all the free peoples of Middle-earth. Such a shadow must be investigated more thoroughly before it grows beyond containment. Indeed, Anatar agreed, his perfect face grave with apparent concern. Yet I wonder if the White Council has the will to act decisively in this matter. Saruman seems reluctant to acknowledge the growing darkness. Gondal felt a sharp stab of suspicion at the mention of the White Council, and its head. Such knowledge was not widely known outside the highest circles of power in Middle-earth. That this Easterling lord, however learned, should speak so familiarly of their internal deliberations was troubling. You seem remarkably well informed about matters kept secret by design, Gandalf observed, his tone carefully neutral. Anatar smiled, a flash of perfect teeth in the gloom of the chamber. Information is a commodity like any other gray pilgrim. It flows to those who know its value and are willing to pay the price of acquisition. As if sensing Gandalf's growing weariness, Anatar rose and moved to a wall scone, adjusting the torch to cast more light upon the chamber. But perhaps you would care to examine something that may shed further light upon our discussion. From within the folds of his crimson robe, he produced a small metal box adorned with the same strange runes that circled the Pelennor, with a soft word spoken in a language Gandalf had not heard in many centuries. Anatar opened the box to reveal a collection of small stone tablets, each no larger than a man's palm, carved with intricate symbols. These were found near Thranduil by my servants. Anatar explained. They appear to be communication devices of some kind, allowing the Nameless One to extend its influence beyond the Confines of the fortress, Gandalf accepted one of the tablets, turning it carefully in his hands. The runes were indeed ancient, dating to the First Age, or perhaps even earlier. They pulsed faintly, with an inner light similar to that of the Palantir, though more subdued. With a start he recognized them as a variant of the script used in Morgoth's Fortress of Angband. Though adapted for some new purpose, these are objects of significant power. Gandalf acknowledged, and they confirm that whatever dwells in Dol Guldur is no mere wraith or lesser spirit, but something of far greater malice and purpose. Anatar nodded in satisfaction. Then we are of one mind on this matter. The question becomes what action to take against this growing threat. For a moment Gandalf allowed himself to believe that he had indeed found an unexpected ally in this strange Easterling lore. The evidence presented aligned with his own investigations, and the knowledge demonstrated by his host, while unusually extensive, could be explained by possession of the Palantir and connections among the Eastern peoples. I shall bring this information before the White Council. Gandalf decided these tablets will provide tangible evidence of the threat, perhaps enough to spur Saruman to action. At last, a wise course, Anatar agreed, collecting the tablets and returning them to their container, though I would caution against undue haste. The Nameless One has agents in many places, some perhaps closer to your council than you might suspect. As Anatar spoke these words, his gaze met Gandalf's directly, and for an instant something shifted in those perfect features, like a mask momentarily slipping to reveal glimpses of what lay beneath. It was gone so quickly that Gandalf might have believed he imagined it, save for the sudden chill that ran through him, a warning from instincts far older than his current form. You speak as one with intimate knowledge of our adversary, Gandalf said, carefully measuring each word, almost as if you have encountered this presence directly. Anat's smile remained unchanged, but his eyes grew watchful. All who study the darkness must sometimes gaze into its depths. Gray Pilgrim, how else are we to understand what we oppose? Night fell upon the mountain fortress, though within its windowless inner chambers darkness and light held little meaning. Anatar led Gondal deeper into the ancient structure, down winding staircases that spiraled into the very heart of the mountain. Few have walked these passages since the fortress was abandoned at the close of the First Age. Anatar said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. The dwarves avoided this place, even in the height of their kingdom, believing it cursed. And do you believe, Gondal asked, noting how the walls here were carved with symbols far older than those commonly used by elves or men, reminiscent of markings he had seen only in the most ancient texts preserved in Valinor? I believe that knowledge has no moral character, Anatar replied with a slight smile. It is neither cursed nor blessed, merely waiting for those with wisdom to claim it. They emerged into a vast chamber that appeared to have been carved from a natural cavern, unlike the upper levels of the fortress, which bore the marks of many different occupants throughout the ages. This space remained as it had been created in the dawn of Middle-earth. Great pillars rose to support a ceiling lost in shadow, each carved in the likeness of a tree, with sprawling branches that intertwined. Overhead at the center of the chamber stood a circular table of black stone, its surface polished to such perfection that it reflected the light of a Not's torch like the surface of a midnight pool. Around its edge were 7 high-backed chairs, each carved from a different material, stone and metal, and wood from trees long extinct in Middle-earth. As they approached the table, a figure stepped from behind one of the massive pillars, causing Gandalf to In his grip upon his staff, peace, wizard the figure said in the rough accent of the northern dwarves, I mean no harm to you. Or my lord the dwarf was broad-shouldered and stern-faced, his beard braided in the fashion of the iron hills, adorned with clasps of dull metal. His eyes, however, held a strange light, almost feverish in its intensity. This is Kazib, my most loyal servant, Anatar explained. He guides me through the mountains and ensures that my studies here remain undisturbed. Gandalf regarded the dwarf carefully. We met one of your kinsmen on the path, he said, wounded, and speaking of betrayal, something flickered in the dwarf's expression. Quickly masked Nori always was weak of heart and mind, he replied. Dismissively he fled. When we discovered the true treasures, this place holds treasures beyond mere gold or jewels. Anatar gestured toward the table, speaking of treasures. I have something to show you that may shed light on our earlier discussion. The black stone surface lay, a large parchment yellowed, with extreme age, yet perfectly preserved. Gandalf recognized it immediately as a map, though unlike any he had seen before. It depicted Middle-earth as it had existed in the Second Age, with 7 locations marked in reading, connected by lines of gold that formed a complex pattern across the continent. This map was created by the elven smiths of Arian. Anatar said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It shows the intended locations for the 7 rings given to the dwarf lords. Gandalf carefully examined the map without touching it. Around the borders were annotations in a cipher he had not encountered before, though elements of it seemed familiar, echoing both elven script and something darker, more angular, a fascinating historical relic. Gandalf said neutrally, though his mind raced with the implications of such a document. The crafting of the Rings of Power was a closely guarded piece of law, their original locations known to few indeed in the current age more than that. Anatar said, leaning closer, his perfect face illuminated by the torch held by the dwarf. The annotations contain instructions for using the rings in concert, for amplifying their power through specific alignments, knowledge lost even to those who created them. And where did you acquire such a rare artifact? Gandalf asked, observing how the dwarf Khazid stared hungrily at the map, his eyes never leaving the marks that indicated where the dwarven rings had once been distributed. It was sealed within one of the pillars of this very chamber, Anata's replied smoothly, along with other documents relating to ring law. I believe this fortress served as a secret repository of knowledge during the War of the Last Alliance, a place where crucial information could be preserved should Sauron prove victorious. The casual mention of the Dark Lord's name hung in the air between them. Gandalf noted how Anatar spoke it without the customary hesitation most displayed when referring to the ancient enemy. You have an uncommon interest in the rings. Gandalf observed, his tone conversational despite the weariness growing within him. All who seek power must understand the greatest works of power ever created in Middle-earth. Anatar replied, the rings represent the pinnacle of craft, the perfect blending of physical material and metaphysical. Well, even those who oppose their use must study their nature outside. The wind had risen howling among the mountain peaks and finding its way even into this subterranean chamber, where it created an eerie music as it passed through hidden apertures in the stone. The sound seemed almost like voices chanting in some forgotten tongue, rising and falling in a rhythm that made Gandalf's thoughts grow strangely sluggish. He looked up at the vaulted ceiling, where the torchlight now revealed ancient murals depicting the forging of great rings. The artistry was exquisite, showing robed figures laboring at forges, while a tall, beautiful being directed their work his hands guiding theirs as the rings. Took shape the face of this figure. Was rendered with particular care, its beauty almost painful to behold. With a sudden chill, Gandalf realized the face in the mural bore a striking resemblance to Anatar himself. Snow began to fall outside, visible through a high shaft that admitted a column of pale moonlight into the chamber. The flakes drifted down like spectral messengers, illuminated briefly in the shaft of light before vanishing into the shadows below. Gandalf stepped away from the table, moving to examine one of the pillars more. Closely upon it were carved runes that struck him with immediate recognition, for they were nearly identical to those he knew existed upon the One Ring itself, though he had never seen them directly, knowing of them only through ancient accounts. These markings, he said carefully, they appear to be in the black speech of Mordor. A keen observation Anatar acknowledged. Come and stand beside him. This fortress predates the creation of that tongue, of course. What you see here are the proto-forms from which that language later developed, the original words of power from which Sauron derived his speech of domination. You speak with remarkable familiarity of such dark matters, Gandalf noted, watching the dwarf Khazar from the corner of his eye, aware that the stout figure had moved to position himself between Gandalf and the chamber's entrance. To understand light, one must study darkness, Anatar replied. Is that not why you came here, gray pilgrim, to understand the shadow growing in greenwood by? Confronting knowledge others fear to seek, Gandalf did not immediately reply, his attention caught by something in the patterns of gold upon the map. The lines connecting the 7 marked locations, when viewed from a particular angle, formed a shape reminiscent of an eyelidless and wreathed in flame. The hour grew late, though in the windowless depths of the mountain fortress time had little meaning. Gandalf felt a growing, disquietus sense that beneath the civil conversation and scholarly discussion, currents of power were moving with purpose towards some unseen destination. They had returned to the upper chamber, where food and wine still waited untouched upon the table. Anatar moved with fluid grace to stand before the great map upon the wall, his slender fingers tracing the contours of lands long changed by the passing of ages. Tell me, gray pilgrim, he said without turning, what does the White Council know of the rings that remain? The question hung in the air between them, deceptively simple yet laden with implication. Gandalf considered his response, carefully aware that the conversation had reached a critical juncture. The 3 remain with the elves, as was intended. He replied at last, the 9 were taken by the Nazgul, who fell under Sauron's dominion. Of the 7 given to the dwarves, some were consumed by dragon fire, others reclaimed by Sauron before his fall. The one Anatar asked, his voice barely above a whisper, what does your Kunil believe of the ruling ring? It was lost, Gandalf said simply, cast into the river Anduin when his sword fell. Whether it remains there or has been carried to the sea, and can say with certainty. Anatar turned then, and his face had changed subtly. The beauty remained, but there was a sharpness to it now, like the edge of a perfectly crafted blade, and his eyes held a light that seemed to burn from within. Lost, he repeated the word, carrying a weight of ages, a curious word for such a thing. Lost suggests the possibility of being found again, does it not? He moved to stand behind his chair, his hands resting lightly upon its carved back. And if it were found, what then? What would the wise counsel in such a circumstance? Its destruction, Gandalf replied without hesitation. The ring was created for one purpose alone, to dominate all others It cannot be wielded for good regardless of the initial intentions of the bearer. A smile curved in Not's perfect lips, though it did not reach his eyes. Such certainty. From one who has never held it, I wonder, is this your wisdom speaking, or merely the instructions given to you before you were sent to these shores? The words struck Gandalf like a physical blow, for they revealed knowledge that no being in Middle-earth should possess save those few who knew the true nature of the Ari. I do not take your meaning, Gandalf said, carefully, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly upon his staff. Come now, Anatar, said his voice rich with amusement, let us set aside pretense at least. Between ourselves, you are no mere wandering wizard Gandalf the Grey, or should I address you as a Loren, as you were known in Valinor before the Vala clothed you in that aging mortal form, and sent you here as their emissary? The chamber seemed suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. Gandalf remained outwardly calm, though his mind raced through the implications of this revelation. You claim unusual knowledge for an Easterling lord, he observed, neither confirming nor denying the assertion. Anatar laughed in a sound of genuine mirth that echoed from the stone walls. Is that what you believe me to be? How charmingly modest of you to think I would present myself as something so commonplace. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, he raised his hand, and the torches around the chamber flared suddenly brighter, their light taking on a quality that was not entirely natural in that enhanced illumination. And AR seemed to grow taller, his presence filling the room with a tangible power that pressed against Gandalf's senses. Allow me to introduce myself properly, he said, his voice deeper, now resonating with authority. I am Anatar, Lord of Gifts, yes, but that name was merely one of convenience, adopted for a specific purpose in an earlier age. Before that, I was called on the admirable Lieutenant Temeler himself during the first age of this world. He paused, watching Gandalf's face closely. But you would know me by the name given to me by the elves after my master's defeat. Sauron, they called me. The abhor the name seemed to hang in the air between them, charged with the power of truth. Finally spoken aloud, Gandalf remained utterly still, his expression betraying nothing of the shock and calculation racing through his mind. If what you claim is true, Gandalf said at last, his voice steady, then you take a great risk in revealing yourself so openly to one of the Ari. Risk, Sauron echoed, seeming genuinely amused by the concept. What risk? Do I take you are alone here, far from any who might aid you, and while your power is not inconsiderable. Olorin, do you truly believe you could stand against me in my own stronghold? He gestured toward the seeing stone that still rested upon its pedestal. Through the Pelennor here, I have watched the movements of all 5 Istari. Since your arrival in Middle-earth, I know that Saruman seeks knowledge above all else, that Radagast has become enamored of beasts and birds to the exclusion of his true purpose. The blue wizards have vanished into the east, their influence scattered and diluted among the tribes there. And what of me? Gondal asked, genuinely curious despite the danger of his position. What have you observed of my purpose? You alone remain true to your mission. Sauron acknowledged, an odd note of respect in his voice. You walk among the lesser races, offering guidance rather than domination, wisdom rather than mere knowledge. It is why I sought this meeting of all your order. You alone might understand what I offer. And what is that? Partnership, Sauron, he said simply, not servitude, not dominion, but true collaboration between equals. He moved to the window where snow continued to fall in the darkness outside. The Vala have abandoned Middle-earth. Olorin, they sit in their distant paradise, while the races here struggle and fade. The elves diminish, the dwarves delve ever deeper into their mountains men grow shorter-lived and more quarrelsome. With each generation, he turned back to face Gandalf, his expression earnest. It need not be so. With the combined wisdom of our two orders we could create something lasting here, a realm of order and beauty that does not depend upon the distant oversight of powers who refuse to intervene directly in this world they claim to cherish. At what cost, Gandalf asked quietly, for there is always a cost to such ambitions. Sauron smiled, and for a moment Gandalf could see clearly what he must have been before his fall, a being of extraordinary brilliance and vision. The cost of all great works, O Lauren. Sacrifice, discipline, the setting aside of smaller concerns for greater purpose. And the ring, Gandalf pressed, would this partnership include its recovery? The ring is a tool, nothing more. Sauron Bite replied with a dismissive gesture, one of many that might serve a greater purpose. But Gondal had seen the flash in those ancient eyes at the mention of the ring, the momentary tightening of Sauron's perfect features that betrayed the lie in his casual words. The One Ring was no mere tool to its creator, but the very center of his being, the focus of his will. "In power you offer much," Gandalf said carefully. "Such decisions cannot be made in haste." Dawn approached unseen beyond on the mountain walls, but Gandalf sensed the changing hour as only one of the mire could. He had remained vigilant through the night, standing before one who had once been his kin in Valinor, before ambition and Melkor's influence had corrupted Sauron's path. They stood on a balcony carved into the eastern face of the mountain, overlooking the vast expanse of Rhenal. The first light of morning touched to the distant horizon, painting the snow-covered peaks in rose and gold. Beautiful, is it not? Sauron observed this world has a fragile splendor that Valinor, for all its perfection, could never match, and yet you would reshape it to your design. Gandalf replied, eyes fixed on the awakening landscape, bending all things to your will rather than allowing them to follow their own nature. Is that not what all thinking beings do? Sauron asked, his voice reasonable, almost gentle. The elves reshape forests to create their realms. The dwarves carve mountains into halls. Men build cities where once wild meadows grew. All exert their will upon the world. There is a difference between dwelling within the world and seeking to dominate it. Gandalf counted between shaping one's surroundings and demanding that all conform to a single vision. Sauron smiled. Philosophy was ever your strength, Aaron. Even in Valinor you were known for wisdom rather than power. He gestured toward the horizon. But wisdom without power to implement, it is merely contemplation, ultimately futile in a world of action. Gondal considered his words carefully, though he stood before one of Middle-earth's greatest threats. This conversation represented a unique opportunity to understand his adversary's mind. I have observed that power without wisdom invariably leads to destruction, he said at last, not only of others, but eventually of the wielder as well. Was that not the fate of your former master? A shadow passed across Sauron's perfect features. Morgoth made errors of judgment. He became obsessed with destruction for its own sake, forgetting that true power lies in creation, in bringing order to chaos. And you believe you have learned from his mistakes? I have had ages to contemplate them, Sauron replied. While bound to my master, I could not fully pursue my own vision. After his defeat, I saw more clearly the path forward. He turned to face Gandalf directly. You speak of dominion as if it were inherently evil, yet is that not precisely what the Vala exercise over Auror? They shape the world according to their design, intervening when events displease them, withdrawing When the consequences proved difficult, Gondal recognized the dangerous seduction in these words, the half-truths woven with genuine insight that had led so many to follow Sauron through the ages. Even now, knowing fully whom he faced, Gandalf could perceive remnants of what this being had once been. A spirit of order whose gifts might have benefited all. Creation, had they not turned to darker purpose, the Vala sought to implement its vision, not impose their own designs in defiance of, as Gandalf said, there lies the fundamental difference, one that cannot be reconciled through wordplay or philosophy. Sauron's expression hardened, and yet Iluvatar remains silent, offering no guidance as his creation suffers. Is blind obedience to an absent creator truly the highest wisdom you can offer? Alurin and the dwarf Khazad have appeared at the entrance, bowing. Deeply, my lord, the preparations you requested are complete. Excellent, Sauron replied, dismissing him with a gesture before turning back to Gondal. I have had a chamber prepared for you while our discussion continues. You should take some rest. Gandalf inclined his head slightly. Before I consider rest, there is a matter I would have clarified throughout our oration. You have spoken of partnership, of shared purpose, yet you have not addressed the fundamental question that divides us. And what is that? Sauron asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the freedom of the peoples of Middle-earth to determine their own fates. Gandalf said, simply, any vision of order that denies this principle cannot be reconciled with the purpose for which I was sent to these shores. Someone regarded him thoughtfully. Freedom is a complex concept. Orin, consider the child who demands freedom to play with fire, unaware of the danger. Is it kindness to grant such freedom or cruelty? The peoples of Middle-earth are not children, Gandalf counted. Are they not? They live such brief spans, accumulating little wisdom before passing. They make the same errors generation after generation, learning nothing from history. They war amongst themselves over trivial boundaries and imagined slights. Sauron moved to a small table where an ancient text lay open. There is a prophecy here written before the breaking of Thangordrim. It speaks of a time when the scattered kingdoms of men will be reunited under the banner of a returning king. Gial felt a chill at these words, for he knew of such prophecies guarded closely by elven law masters and Numbermanorian descendants. The line of Isildur continues unbroken. Sauron continued watching Gondal closely, though diminished and hidden. It endures. The heir of Elendil lives, though he knows not yet his destiny. Your point, Gander. Alas, his tone neutral despite the significance of this revelation. The prophecy speaks of restoration, of unification under a rightful lord. It is a vision of order imposed upon the fractious races of Middle-earth. His perfect lips curved in a slight smile. Is that so different from what I propose? The methods may differ, but the outcome bears striking similarities. The difference lies in choice, Gandalf said firmly, in consent freely given rather than submission extracted through fear or deception. No matter how similar the outward forms, this distinction remains absolute. Sauron studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a well-made point. You have given me much to consider, Alurin. Perhaps you will extend the same courtesy to my arguments during your rest. As Gondal followed Khazad from the chamber, he felt Sauron's gaze upon his back, calculating and patient. The confrontation had barely begun, and already it had taken paths Gandalf could not have anticipated, a web into which he had willingly walked in search of truth. The chamber to which Khazad led Gandalf was smaller than those they had occupied previously, but appointed With surprising comfort, a fire burned in a hearth carved from the living rock, casting warm light across a bed, and chairs crafted in the elven style of the Second Age books and scrolls lined shelves along one wall, their spines bearing titles and languages both familiar and obscure. My lord Anatar suggests you might wish to refresh yourself, the dwarf said, gesturing to a basin of steaming water. He will summon you when he is prepared to continue. Your discussion. When Khazad had departed, Gandalf moved carefully around the chamber, examining his surroundings with all his senses. The room contained no obvious traps or enchantments, though the entire fortress thrummed with ancient power that made subtle observations difficult. Gandalf did not touch the water or the food that had been provided, nor did he sit upon the bed. Instead, he seated himself cross-legged upon the stone floor, drawing his gray cloak around him, and withdrew his pipe from a pocket hidden within his robes, the familiar ritual of filling the pipe with leaf from the Shire brought comfort and clarity. As Gandalf kindled the leaf with a thought and a subtle gesture, he drew the smoke deep into lungs that, while appearing mortal, housed a spirit far older than the fortress around him. He exhaled slowly, the smoke forming a fine mist that spread throughout the chamber, seeming to cling to the corners and crevices where shadow lay deepest. Through this subtle working, he confirmed what he had already suspected. The chamber, like much of the fortress, was woven through with enchantments of observation. Sauron could perceive all that transpired within these walls, though the smoke now provided a measure of obscuration, a thin veil between Gandalf's thoughts and his host's perception. Secure in this minor protection, Gandalf considered all he had learned. Sauron's revelation of his true identity had been calculated, of that Gandalf had no doubt the Dark Lord could have maintained his disguise longer had he wished that he had chosen. To reveal himself suggested confidence, but also a desire for something that could only be obtained through honesty, understanding perhaps, or validation. For all his power and ancient knowledge, Sauron had been alone in his great purpose for ages beyond counting. Even his most devoted servants knew him only as Lord and Master, never as equal or confidant. In Gandalf, he had recognized one of his own kind, a fellow mere who might comprehend the scope of his ambitions without the limitations of mortal. Understanding this realization brought no comfort to Gandalf. That one so fallen might still hunger for connection made him more dangerous, not less. It suggested depths that simple evil did not possess, complexities that could not be dismissed with convenient labels of darkness or light. The smoke from Gandalf's pipe now filled the chamber with a fine haze, creating patterns that shifted and flowed within. These patterns, Gandalf began to perceive something unexpected, faint images that seemed to arise from the stone itself, memories preserved in the ancient rock. He saw the fortress as it had been in the First Age, a watchtower manned by elves of a lineage now extinct in Middle-earth. He witnessed its abandonment during the War of Wrath. When Morgoth was finally defeated, he observed its long emptiness, disturbed occasionally by wanderers who never remained long, sensing perhaps the lingering power that dwelt within the stone. And then most recently, he saw Sauron's arrival, not in the fair form of Anadar, but in a shape of shadow and flame, weakened still from his defeat at the hands of the last alliance. The Dark Lord had come here to recover his strength, to rebuild his power in secret, while the free peoples believe him vanquished forever. The vision faded as the smoke began to dissipate. Gandalf replenished it with another long draw on his pipe, considering the implications of what he had glimpsed. Sauron had revealed his identity, yes, but not the full extent of his vulnerability. His power, while considerable, was not yet restored to its former heights. This meeting was taking place during a period of rebuilding of preparation for the next phase of his eternal campaign. A soft knock at the door interrupted Gandalf's contemplation. The dwarf Khazad entered. Without waiting for a response, his expression carefully neutral as he regarded the wizard seated upon the floor amid swirling smoke. "My lord requests your presence once more," he said stiffly. Gandalf rose unhurriedly, tapping his pipe against his palm to extinguish the embers before returning it to his robes. "Lead on, Master Dwarf," he said mildly. Khazad led him not back to the balcony chamber, but deeper into the mountain, down winding stairs that descended far below the level of the entrance hall. The air grew warmer as they descended until at last they emerged into a vast cavern where the heart of the mountain revealed itself. A chasm split the cavern floor, and from its depths rose heat and a ruddy glow that spoke of molten stone. Flowing far below, spanning the chasm, was a bridge of black metal wrought in patterns that made the eye uneasy to follow. On the far side stood a forge unlike any Gondal had seen since the fall of Arion, where Kelmor had crafted works of wonder before Sauron's deception had been revealed. Sauron awaited them, there no longer wearing the fair form of Anatar, but something closer to his true nature, taller, now his body wreathed in shadow, that the forge light could not fully penetrate. His eyes gleaming within a fire. Now we come to the heart of matter," Sauron said, his voice deeper than before resonating through the cavern. "I have shown you my true self, Alurin. I have revealed my knowledge of the coming king, of the prophecies that bind our fates together. Now I shall show you what I propose for the future of Middle-earth." He gestured to the forge where metal glowed white hot, not domination through fear, as Morgoth sought not rings to bind the will of others to mine, but a new ordering of the world, with each race contributing its unique gifts to a greater whole. Under your guidance, Gandalf observed. "Under wise governance," Sauron corrected, "which could include you and others of your order who share our vision." In that moment, Gandalf stood the second piece of the mystery that had brought him to this mountain fortress. The map he had seen was not merely a historical relic, but a working plan, one that revealed Sauron's current operations throughout Middle-earth. The chamber transformed around them. What had appeared as a simple forge suddenly revealed its true nature as the illusions crafted by Sauron fell away. The space was vast, extending deep in a mountain, filled with ranks of armor, standing silent like an army awaiting the command to march. Weapons of ancient design hung upon the walls, forged with skills long forgotten in the world above. 4 silent figures emerged from alcoves around the chamber. Warriors, clad in ornate armor of Eastern design, their faces impassive beneath half-helms of blackened steel. They positioned themselves at the corners of the forge platform, watching Gondal with unblinking eyes. "My honor guard," Sauron explained, noting Gandalf's appraisal of the warriors, "faithful servants from the eastern lands who understand the necessity of order." Gandalf said nothing, but his grip tightened almost imperceptibly upon his staff. The casual revelation of these hidden guardians, present yet concealed throughout their earlier conversations, spoke volumes about On's confidence and the extent of his recovered powers. "You have been forthright with me," Alurin Saiyan continued, his form growing more distinct, more present, as if he were gradually allowing himself to fully materialize in the physical world, you have not disguised your skepticism nor hidden behind false courtesy. I respect that even as I work to overcome your objections, he moved to a large table of black. Stone positioned near the forge upon it lay objects covered with cloths of dark. Velvet with a graceful gesture, Sauron removed the first covering, revealing a model of a massive fortress constructed of some dark metal bedur. He said simply, "As it shall be rebuilt in Mordor, not merely a stronghold, but a center of governance, and learning the foundations already lie beneath the ash of that land, awaiting only the final elements needed for its completion." He removed the second cloth, unveiling a perfect replica of the One Ring gleaming in the forge light, the key to all, Sauron said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not merely a tool of domination as you believe, but a focus for the reorganization of Middle-earth itself. Through it, I can restore lands long blighted, bring fertility to deserts, establish a peace that spans from the Western Sea to the farthest reaches of ruin at the cost of freedom." Gandalf said quietly, "At the cost of chaos." Sauron counted, "I offer direction to races that have wandered purposeless since the departure of the Vala from direct intervention in their affairs." The form of Sauron shifted subtly as he spoke, becoming both more beautiful and more terrible to behold, no longer the perfect but limited shape of Anadar, nor yet the terrible dark lord of legend, but something between them, a being of immense power and presence that filled the vast chamber with his "Will I know you, are Lorne saying," said his voice resonating with a new intensity. "One, I have watched you since you came to these shores of all the Ari. You alone have remained true to your purpose, though you may not fully understand what that purpose is." He moved closer, his presence pressing against Gandalf's senses like a physical force. "You were not sent merely to oppose me. The task could have been accomplished far more directly had the Valar wished it. No, you were sent to guide, to advise, to help the peoples of Middle-earth find their path, a path of their own." Choosing, Gandalf insisted, not one imposed upon them, no matter how benevolent the intention, and if their choices lead them to destruction. Sauron asked, "If their petty conflicts and short-sighted desires result in the ruin of all that is fair in Middle-earth, would you stand aside and watch them fall because you value their freedom to choose error above their well-being?" The question struck at the heart of Gandalf's own doubt concerns. He had carried through long centuries of watching the follies of men and elves and dwarves, seeing wisdom ignored and ancient knowledge forgotten. How often had he been tempted to do more than advised to take direct action to prevent disaster? There is a middle path between domination and abandonment, Gandalf replied at last, guidance that respects the dignity of free will while offering wisdom to those who adhere to a path of half measure. Sauron said dismissively of compromises that satisfy neither. Need the time for such approaches is past. O Lorne, the shadow in Greenwood is but the first sign of greater threats to come. Without unified purpose, the free peoples will fall one by one. He gestured, and the air between them shimmered, forming images of possible futures. Gondal saw armies of orcs overrunning the lands of men, dragons returning from the northern wastes, ancient evils awakening from long slumber beneath mountain and forest. These threats approach, whether we wish it or not. Sauron continued, "The choice is not between freedom and control, but between purposeful unity and chaotic destruction." The visions shifted, showing instead great cities of stone and Crystal, orderly fields producing abundant harvests, roads, connecting realms once isolated from one another, knowledge flowing freely between races long suspicious of one another. This is what I offer, Sauron said, softly, not domination for its own sake, but order with purpose, a Middle-earth where the achievements of the First Age can be reclaimed and surpassed. Under your rule, Gandalf observed, under my guidance. Initially, Sauron corrected. But with others of wisdom, sharing in governance, the Ari was. Sent to these shores for a reason, Olorin, perhaps this is that reason, though the valor themselves may not have understood the true purpose of their actions, the visions faded, leaving only the reality of the chamber with its silent guardians and ancient weapons. Sauron regarded Gandalf with eyes that held the light of stars mingled with shadow. You need not answer immediately, he said, but consider what I have shown you, consider what might be accomplished if we set aside ancient enmity and recognized our common purpose. And if I refuse, Gandalf asked, his voice steady despite the weight of will directed against him, then you depart as you came. Sauron replied, simply, I did not bring you here by force, nor will I keep you by such means. The choice must be yours, freely made, or it has no value. This unexpected response gave Gandalf pause. He had anticipated aided threats, perhaps even an attempt to overwhelm his will or bind him through some ancient sorcery that Sauron would respect his choice, even if that choice was rejection, suggested complexities to the Dark Lord's character that legend had long forgotten. You surprise me, Gandalf admitted, because you know me only through the account of my enemies, Sauron said with the faintest smile. Even the wise see what they expect to see, Olorin. It is the greatest blindness of all. As he spoke these words, Sauron made a subtle gesture with one hand. The forge fire flared suddenly brighter, casting a shadow across the stone floor, a shadow that took a shape far different from the form that cast it. For an instant, Gandalf beheld the truth behind the fair appearance, the reality of what Sauron had become during his long rebellion against the natural order of Arthur. In that moment of revelation, all pretense fell away. Between them no longer was this a meeting between potential allies or even philosophical opponents. This was the confrontation that had been inevitable since Gondal had first set foot upon the shores of Middle-earth, the meeting of powers ancient and terrible in their potential. I know you now, Gondal said quietly, as you have always been, not as you wish to appear. Silence fell between them, heavy as the mountain above. Sauron stood fully manifested, neither the fair Anatar nor yet the Dark Lord of legend, but something between, a being of power barely contained within physical form. Yes, Sauron acknowledged, his voice resonating through the chamber. You see me as I am, and I see you all are not as the wandering wizard in gray, but as the spirit of wisdom who once walked in the gardens of Lauon and Valinor. The eastern warriors shifted positions, moving to encircle them. Steel whispered against leather as weapons were drawn. Your guardians grow anxious, Gandalf observed. They sense the power you contain, Sauron replied. Even constrained by the limitations the Vala placed upon you, your true nature cannot be entirely concealed. A new figure emerged from behind the forge, an elf clad in dark green who positioned himself near the chamber entrance. Observing with keen eyes, you did not mention your elven spy, Gandalf noted. There are many in Middle-earth who recognize the necessity of what I propose, Sauron said smoothly. Not all who serve me do so in darkness. I did not come here to be recruited, Gandalf said, nor did you invite me. with any real expectation that I would join you, you underestimate my optimism, Sauron smiled. Even the most steadfast purposes can be swayed when presented with new understanding. Then why this meeting? Gandalf pressed. Why reveal yourself to one you must know would oppose your designs to take your measure? Sauron replied, simply as you have taken mine. We are opponents in a game that spans ages. It seems only proper that we should know one another directly rather than through rumor and legend. He moved to the edge of the forge platform. I wish to know if the Valor had sent you specifically to counter my return, if they had given you knowledge or powers beyond those granted to the other Astari. And your conclusion that they have not, Sauron said. They sent 5 of you scattered across Middle-earth with only vague guidance. They might have sent an army or intervened directly as they did against Morgoth. Instead, they chose subtle influence through emissaries limited in their power. He shook his head slightly. The Valor have withdrawn from direct involvement into the affairs of Middle-earth. They observe, but they will not act decisively even against a threat they once deemed worthy of their full attention. Perhaps they understand what you do not. Gandalf suggested that Middle-earth belongs to its peoples now, not to powers from beyond the sea. Our role is to guide, not to impose our will. No matter how benevolent we believe, that will be a convenient philosophy for those whose power has been constrained. Sauron replied. The dwarf Khazad burst into the chamber. My lord, riders approach from the North Elves, moving toward the fortress. It seems our time grows short. Sauron said, your presence has been noted more quickly than I anticipated. The White Council has many eyes. Gandalf replied. Did you truly believe my journey here would go unremarked unless this interruption was by design? Sauron's gaze sharpened. A signal perhaps arranged before you enter my domain. Gandalf smiled slightly. As you said, we are opponents in an ancient game. It would be unwise to enter your stronghold without certain precautions. For a moment, Sauron's composure slipped, revealing the terrible power beneath. The warriors drew their blades, blocking all exits. I could keep you here, Sauron said softly. The elves would find only an empty fortress. You could try. Gand acknowledged, his staff beginning to glow. But that was never your intention, was it? You sought understanding, not confrontation. Not yet. The moment stretched between them. Then Sauron laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. Well reasoned. He said, the time for our true confrontation has not yet come. We both have preparations to make pieces to position upon the board. The warriors sheathe their weapons. You may go freely, tell your council what you have learned, or keep it secret. Either serves my purpose. And what purpose is that? Gondal asked. To ensure that when we next meet, all illusions have been set aside. Sauron replied, no more disguises, only the truth of what we are and what we intend for Middle-earth. Khazad moved to guide Gandalf from the fortress, but as they turned to leave, Sauron spoke once more. One last thing, he said. The heir of Aelur, the one destined to reunite the kingdoms of men. I have already set forces in motion to find him. For what purpose? Gandalf asked. What better way to prevent the return of the king than to ensure no king remains to return? Sauron replied calmly. The line of Isildur will end, and with it any hope of restoration for the kingdoms of men. Then we are indeed opponents, Gandalf said quietly, and this meeting has served its purpose. As Khazad led him away, Gandalf saw the Eland spy slipping through a different passage in that moment. He made his decision. This knowledge would not be shared fully with the White Council, not even with Saruman. Some truths were too dangerous. The confrontation with Sauron would come, but not yet. Until then, Gandalf would watch and wait and prepare for the struggle that would determine the fate of Middle-earth. Evening light filled the council chamber in Rivendell, Where Elrond stood before the gathered witnesses, the tale had been told in full piece together from the fragments of the hidden manuscript. And from Elon's own knowledge, so Gandalf departed from the fortress Elon. Said the elven riders were led by Glorfindel, who had grown concerned when Gandalf did not return from the northern mountains at the appointed time. They found him already descending the mountain path, showing no outward sign of the momentous meeting that had transpired, and he told no one of this encounter. Arwen asked, her face troubled in the fading light. He confided only in San upon his return to the Grey Havens. Elrond replied, and later in me, though he shared not all the details we have now learned from this manuscript. The dwarf Khazad-Gad said softly, "What became of him? He did not survive the day." Elend answered whether Sauron eliminated him to preserve the secret, or whether he attempted to follow Gondal and met with some accident. None can say. His kinsmen searched for him through that summer, but found no trace. The council chamber fell silent as each considered what they had learned outside the waters of Rivendell flowed endless and pure. We must consider what this means for the struggle before us. Elrond said Sauron knew of the heir of Ilder centuries ago. He has had long years to search for the remnants of that bloodline, yet he has not found them. Arwen observed the northern kingdom has kept its secrets well, and must continue to do so. Gadriel added, until the time is right for the heir to claim his birthright. Elrond gathered the fragments of the manuscript and returned them to their protective covering. This account must remain hidden. He decided knowledge of this meeting would serve only to create fear. Let it be sealed away, where only the wise may access it if need arises. As Lindia took the wrapped manuscript, Elrond turned to the others. What we have learned may seem troubling, but I find hope within it. Sauron, for all his power, did not turn Gondal from his purpose. He sought to recruit one of the Auri to his cause, and failed. And in revealing his plans, Arwen added, he gave Gandalf the knowledge needed to counter them. Indeed, Elrond agreed, though neither could have known it. Then that meeting set in motion events that would eventually lead to the finding of the One Ring, and perhaps to Sauron's final defeat. Night settled over Rivendell. Stars appeared one by one, the same stars that had shone upon Middle-earth through all its long history of struggle between light and shadow. Let us take our rest, Elon said. At last tomorrow brings its own concerns. As the council dispersed, Gadriel remained by the window, her ancient eyes reflecting the starlight. The game continues. She murmured, pieces move upon the board that was set in motion ages ago. The night deepened over Rivendell, peaceful and serene within its protected valleys. Knowledge, both ancient and terrible, had been understood and carefully set aside until such time as it might be needed. The streams continued their eternal flow. Stars wheeled overhead, and Middle-earth slept, unaware of the currents of power that moved beneath the surface, preparing for the final confrontation that would determine the fate of all.